so waiting for 1 minute and we'll start our session, please. Клікати, він каже, next slide. Або це інше. Dear colleagues, I guess we're ready to start. We have almost all the panelists. We're waiting for one more. If she is able to join, we will be happy to meet her. So my name is Alexey Ryabchin. I'm the Ukrainian COP representative since 2015. It's my 8th COP, and I'm happy to be a moderator of a panel called Climate Damage of Russia's War in Ukraine and the Knowledge Gap on a Conflict and Military Mission. Really important topic, and I'm happy to have a very distinguished panel which consists of the representative of the Ukrainian government. We are still waiting for the representative of the Georgian government to join the panel. We have a very distinguished Ukrainian NGO, and we have international experts and scientists. So, we are covering this topic from a different point of view. And I would say this is a very ambitious topic and very inconvenient here in this COP, because to tell about the emissions that is uncovered by the UNFCCC and with the emission that doesn't belong to anybody. It's something that not all officials from the COP are willing to discuss. But we in Ukraine, having this war of aggression, we are ready to raise very inconvenient questions. And if you visit our pavilion, you will see a very inconvenient roof from a Kakhovka dam that we brought, that survived the First World War, the Second World War, but it didn't survive the Russian aggression. And you will see the installation that covers the thousands and millions of people who lost their homes because of the man-made ecocide, because of the environmental damage, because we have a Chernobyl disaster attack, we have a nuclear terrorism, we have huge amount of situations that been normally already described numerous times, but we have something new, which is a climate damage. And this is a topic that we are willing to discuss here in this distinguished panel. So I would give a floor with the opening remarks to Victoria Kireyeva, who is the Deputy Minister of Environment Protection of Ukraine responsible for the climate, also the Deputy Head of the Ukrainian delegation. Victoria, the floor is yours. The presentation is already here, and if you need assistance, just tell me and I will do the next slide.
Пані та панове, я вас вітаю на цьому заході.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you this side event on behalf of the government of Ukraine.
Сьогодні минає 649-й день повномасштабного вторгнення Росії в мою країну. І вже понад 21 місяць ми боремося з цією ситуацією. Я людина, яка не покидала Україну на протязі 2 років. Я з першого дня війни бачила, що відбувається, як російська агресія руйнує наші екосистеми, як руйнує наші будинки, як вбиває наших дітей. І тому я сьогодні хочу з вами поговорити не тільки про шкоду довкіллю, а також про шкоду війни всьому світу, всьому миру і, напевно, досягнення наших найвищих цілей.
Today marks the 649 day of the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation of my country, and for more than 21 months Ukraine is defending our right to exist as a sovereign nation. And as a person, I did not leave my country, and I saw in my eyes how Russia destroyed infrastructure, killed people, and how it stops us from getting to our global goal.
Кожного дня ми платимо жахливу ціну. Ми втрачаємо не тільки мирне населення, ми втрачаємо наших військових, які захищають нашу незалежність. Мільйони українців покинули свою державу, щоб вижити, щоб зберегти своїх дітей і зберегти своє майбутнє.
Every day we pay a high price, we are losing people, and millions of Ukrainians have left the country to save their lives and to save their children.
А також війна має руйнівний вплив на навколишнє середовище. Повітря, ґрунти і вода забруднені внаслідок бойових дій. Україна високорозвинена країна, і в нас було багато різних промислових галузей. І підприємства були побудовані за часів Радянського Союзу, і щодня вони потребували технічного догляду, забезпечення екологічної безпеки. На жаль, на сьогодні ми на окупованих територіях не можемо це забезпечити.
The war has a devastating impact on the environment. Air, soil and water is polluted as a result of the fighting. Ukraine is a highly developed country, and we had many different industries across the country, and most factories were built during the Soviet Union, and for now we cannot ensure the safety because some of the factories are located on the occupied territories.
Але те, що сталося влітку цього року, це вже насправді відбувається екоцидом. Руйнування дамби в Новій Каховці стало найбільшим руйнівним екологічним лихом на нашій країні. Повінь, що спричинила затоплення, призвела до дрейфу мін, загибелі не тільки багатьох тварин, а й цілих екосистем. Ми втратили 14,7 мільярдів кубічних метрів води. Це, для розуміння, вся планета може випити по стакану чистої питної води.
The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in June this year was a devastating environmental crime committed by Russia. The resulting flooding cost drifts of mines, deaths of not many animals, but the whole ecosystems. We have lost 14.7 billion cubic meters of water, which is enough to give every person on the planet a glass of water.
Ми в Міністерстві захисту довкілля намагаємося відстежувати всю шкоду, яка відбувається агресором на нашій території. Ми робимо разом з контролюючими правоохоронними органами, українськими громадськими та міжнародними організаціями фіксування цієї шкоди. На сьогодні вже зафіксовано більше 2900 випадків збитків довкіллю, загальна сума яких становить більше 56,7 мільярдів доларів США. Фіксація збитків нам необхідна для притягнення агресора до відповідальності. Докази екологічних злочинів потрібні і в майбутніх судових процесах. І моє міністерство тісно співпрацює з Генеральною прокуратурою України, щоб впровадити це в життя.
At the Ministry of Environmental Protection, we try to keep track on all the environmental damage this war causes. We do that together with controlling and law enforcement agencies, Ukrainian NGOs, and with the support of our international partners, for which we are very grateful, and we have documented 2,900 cases of environmental damage. The total damage to the environment is more than 56.7 billion US dollars. Assessment of the damage is also necessary to hold the aggressor accountable. The evidence of environmental crimes is necessary in future legal proceedings. In my ministry, we work closely together with the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine.
Україна, як і багато інших країн, продовжує політику зменшення викидів парникових газів. На чолі з міністром Русланом Олександровичем Стрільцем кліматична політика в нашому міністерстві є пріоритетною, і ми робимо все, щоб досягти цілей Паризької угоди. Але агресор щодня віддаляє нас від нашої мети, нівелює всі зусилля цивілізованого світу.
Ukraine, as many countries, is implementing policies to mitigate emissions of greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gases, and together with our minister, head of our ministry, Ruslan Strilet's climate policy is a priority for us to meet the goals of Paris Agreement. But the aggressor is moving us all further away from our goal every day and is undermining all the efforts of a civilized world.
Агресія Російської Федерації спричиняє багато додаткових викидів парникових газів в атмосферу. Ці викиди спричинені насамперед саме війною. Використання палива військовими машинами, боєприпасами і виробництво саме військової техніки, яка є на сьогоднішній день дуже вуглецевоємними для так само, як і виробництво танків та бронетехніки.
The aggression by the Russian Federation is causing many additional emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. These emissions are first of all caused by the war itself, but also the fuel that is used and construction of needed and construction of and building all the lines during the war.
Внаслідок війни від пожеж постраждало 62 тисячі гектарів нашого лісу, природно-заповідні фонди, наші парки, наші екосистеми, зруйнована інфраструктура. В деяких регіонах вона зруйнована повністю. І в свою чергу Україна буде відновлюватися. Ми будемо відновлюватися по новим, по зеленими принципами. Але ми всі розуміємо, що це також спричинить додаткову кількість викидів парникових газів.
As a result of the war, a considerable area of forests was affected. The area is 62,000 hectares, and also our infrastructure has been destroyed. In some regions, completely destroyed. Despite everything, Ukraine will recover, but at the same time, this will additionally cause a significant amount of emissions.
І виникає питання, а хто несе відповідальність за ці військові викиди? Чи це Україна, на території якої відбувається збройна агресія? Чи Російська Федерація, яка розпочала і продовжує цю війну? Зрозуміло, що викиди є наслідком агресії. І Україна покладає відповідальність за ці викиди на державу-злочинця.
That raises the question who is responsible for the war emissions. Is it Ukraine because most of the emissions happened on the territory of Ukraine, or is it the Russian Federation that started and continues this war? It is clear that emissions are a result of acts of aggression of Ukraine. It is clear that emissions are a result of acts of aggression of Russia, and Ukraine holds the aggressor state responsible for these emissions.
Загальний обсяг викидів після 18 місяців війни на сьогодні оцінюється близько 150 мільйонів тонн СО2, що перевищує річний обсяг викидів такої високорозвиненої країни, як Бельгія. 150 мільйонів тонн викидів парникових газів при застосуванні вуглеця соціальної вартості буде становити більше 11 мільярдів доларів США. Ми вимагаємо, щоб Росія виплатила цю суму як репарацію за викиди, спричинені війною.
The total amount of emissions after 18 months of war is estimated to be 150 million tons CO2, which is more than the annual emission of a highly developed country like Belgium. 150 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, when applying the social cost of carbon, are worth more than $11 billion. We demand that Russia pays Ukraine this amount as a reparation for the war emissions.
Я запрошую всіх вас відвідати український павільйон 8, 9, 10 грудня, там, де буде детально розглянуті саме питання, як ми будемо стягувати ці викиди, як ми юридично будемо це все прописувати разом з нашими міжнародними партнерами, з різними країнами, і ми детально зможемо це обговорити, як ми далі будемо діяти, як ми далі будемо впроваджувати механізми, які забезпечать нам досягнення саме нашої мети при досягненні цілей Паризької угоди.
I invite all of you on 8th, 9th and 10th of December to the Ukrainian pavilion, where we will hold discussions on reparations and mechanisms together with our international partners. And these reparations is a way to achieving Paris Agreement goals.
Щиро дякую вам за увагу.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Victoria, and the colleagues who assisted with the translation for the opening speech. And now I would give a floor to the keynote speech, I would say, to Leonard de Clercq, who is the leading author at the initiative on GEG accounting of war. Leonard will be with us online, and I'm personally proud of Leonard's speech and of Leonard's joint work that he did. I'm uploading his presentation because it's basically answering lots of questions, like who's accountable for the military mission, who owns this emission, how to make aggressor accountable, how to stop basically the future war, because if we will put aggressor accountable, we will put additional burden, and we do hope that the further aggressors might double check while doing this aggression. So Leonard, I do hope that I did a great teaser for your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you confirm you can hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, and all of the crowd is shaking heads, and they hear you, they see you, and they see your presentation. So please.
Excellent. Okay. Yes, thank you, Oleksiy, for the kind introduction, and also from my side, a warm welcome to everyone at this side event, both those that are in person in Dubai and that are following this side event through the YouTube live stream. In my presentation, as lead author of the initiative on the GEG accounting of war, I will address three different topics. First of all, the assessment of 19 months of war and how many emissions this has caused. Secondly, and the most important part, is how can we hold the Russian Federation accountable for these emissions and for this damage that they've caused to our climate. And last but not least, I will briefly touch upon the way how we can repair some of the damage that has been done. Next slide, please. Here you can see the overview of total emissions of 18 months of war. So we're talking about a period 24th of February of last year until the 1st of September 2023, so this year. And just keep in mind that we're already in December, 3 months has passed since then, so the total amount has only increased. And as the Deputy Minister already mentioned, we're talking about 150 million tons of CO2 in total, and they have different sources. And for those that were familiar with our previous report, which covered 12 months of war, we have the same sources of emissions. To start with, obviously the warfare itself, which is 25% or 37 million tons of CO2. We've seen a lot of fires in the forest, mainly along the front line because of the shelling and causing sparks, causing wildfires. not only in forests, but also at agricultural land. And in the winter, last winter, it slowed down a bit because of low temperatures, but when the temperatures went up this summer, fire started raging again. We had movements of refugees, 2%, civil aviation, as Russia has closed the airspace above Siberia. Flights from Northern Europe to Asia have to make enormous detours to reach the destination, causing additional kerosene uses and hence additional emissions. The sabotage of Nord Stream was a one-time act, but as you can see, these emissions are significant as well, almost 50 million tons of CO2. And last but not least, the biggest source of emissions will be in the future reconstruction of Ukraine, and I'll touch upon that in more detail a bit later. Next slide, please. So if we look at the warfare emissions, 37 million tons in total, the largest part is for the fossil fuel consumption by both armies. This is more than 85% of the total emissions, but also the production of ammunition, the production of military equipment will cause emissions. That doesn't necessarily have to be in Ukraine. That could also be ammunition that has been supplied from abroad, either to Ukraine or to the Russian Federation. New in this report that we also have looked into the transport emissions of equipment that was supplied from the Americas over the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. As you can see, that's 0.4 million tons of CO2. So this is a relatively a small amount. But just to imagine, I mean, COP28 takes 2 weeks of negotiations. After these 2 weeks, just only the fuel emissions will have increased with 1 million tons of CO2, and the war is still ongoing, so the emissions will only go up further. Next slide, please. Reconstruction emissions. There are different types of let's say objects that need to be rebuilt. Half of it is for buildings, and a quarter is for repairing roads as transport. Repairing or delivering new vehicles, buses, trams that have been destroyed. And also under the industry and utility category, we're talking about factories and power plants. Next slide, please. As the deputy minister said, Ukraine wants to hold Russia accountable for these emissions. These emissions as of after 18 months, 150 million tons of CO2. And it's important to realize that these emissions would not have happened without the act of aggression of Russia. So these are additional emissions that come on top of the regular peacetime emissions. And it's important to realize that the Russian Federation will be held accountable for the damage it's causing, and that's the damage to humans, to our human beings, to the buildings, but also the damage to the infrastructure is currently also being taken into account. And looking at previous war and conflicts, the fact that the environmental damage is being taken into account is already a first. Nevertheless, we believe that similar to the humans, buildings, and environmental damage, we believe that the emissions of greenhouse gases caused by Russia, that Russia should pay for it. Next slide, please. Now, the big question is, of course, how to do this. And we've asked some lawyers, to look into existing frameworks, how that can be done. Because holding a state responsible for greenhouse gas emissions resulting from an act of aggression, that would be a first. That has never been done before. And the lawyers looked into different frameworks, like, for example, the UN Compensation Commission that has awarded reparation to Kuwait from Iraq following the invasion of Kuwait, and that was also related to environmental damage. We've looked into how the International Court of Justice, how the International Criminal Court, or how it could also work under the UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement. Unfortunately, these existing frameworks provide, at the moment, very limited possibilities. For example, under the Paris Agreement, conflict emissions has never been dealt with, never been looked at. So it's, let's say, not easy to use these existing pathways to hold the Russian Federation accountable. But for the lawyers under us, I really would recommend for you to read chapter 2 of our report. Next slide, please. However, at the moment, the allies of Ukraine are setting up an international compensation mechanism, and this mechanism is established under the auspices of the Council of Europe. And there are currently discussions going on that compensation reparations could be paid from confiscated Russian assets. And as a first step, under the Council of Europe, they've set up a registry that will include all kind of different damages that this war has caused, and it will also include environmental damages. So we believe that in this registry, also the climate-related damages should be included to make sure that once we are going to award reparation to Ukraine, that these damages are included as well. Next slide, please. But a big question is, of course, how would that translate into monetary terms? And if you look at carbon pricing today, you see that we have different prices added to carbon. The most well-known is, of course, the European emissions trading scheme, where in the past 2 years we saw prices going from 60 to 100 euros per ton of CO2. We also have carbon taxes, where Uruguay is charging $158 per ton, whereas Poland only charges $8 per ton of CO2. But in the end, these are not usable indicators, because they are set by government or they're a result of market circumstances. In fact, what you want to look at is what are the costs of these emissions, and also known as the social cost of carbon, or others call it the shadow costs of carbon. And in fact, this is already being done for quite a while. A lot of international financial institutions, when they evaluate whether to invest into and to finance a project, they also wanted to know what the impact of a project is on the emissions, and want those costs also to be taken into account in the financial analysis of such a project. And currently, this is being done by the World Bank, the EBRD, and the European Investment Bank. Next slide, please. And the most common used practice is set by the High-Level Commission on Carbon Prices. This was a study done by Nicholas Stern and Joseph Stiglitz, in which they gave an under limit and an upper limit of what the social cost, what is the shadow cost of carbon, which you can see here on this slide. The estimate has a big range because of the difficulties and the uncertainties that is surrounded. But as you can see, over time these costs are going up. And given the fact that this has been so widely used and has such an authoritative status, we've used this shadow pricing by the High-Level Commission as a basis. Next slide, please. And we took the average carbon price for 2022, 2023, because these are the 2 years in which the emissions happened. And the average is $64 per ton of CO2. And as we have 150 million tons of CO2, we come to a total damage of $9.6 million US, which we believe the Russian Federation should pay to Ukraine. Next slide, please. But of course, getting money is not the objective of Ukraine. In the end of the day, as the Deputy Minister already mentioned, Ukraine is committed to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So this reparation money could be used to repair some of the damage. First of all, the most obvious one is using the money for replanting the forests that have been destroyed by the war. And by doing so, the carbon can be taken out of the atmosphere and be sequestered in the trees. So then at least the wildfire emissions can be undone. Further, Ukraine can use the money to expedite the rollout of renewable energy like solar and wind farms. And the third is, and as was already shown, see if we can minimize these construction emissions, which will happen in the future. And basically, there are 4 ways of dealing with it. Smart design, for example, using less construction materials, but also try to use the destroyed buildings, not tear them down, but see if you can refurbish them. Recycling cement and steel from the debris is also a huge opportunity to avoid some of these emissions. But also low carbon variants of cement and steel are available. And last but not least, Ukraine is an agricultural powerhouse, and it has the potential to grow its own bio-based construction materials, which have the big benefit that they store carbon, so they basically have a negative carbon footprint. And our initial rough estimations is that we have a potential to avoid 30, maybe even 50% of these estimated construction emissions. But on a side event on Thursday, the 6th of December at 10 o'clock in the Ukraine Pavilion, we'll dive a little bit more into details. Next slide, please. But some details, as you can see here, the emissions of different type of buildings, about 75% of all the construction emissions are related to concrete and steel. So that's why it's so important to focus on these 2 construction materials. Next slide, please. So I come to the end of my presentation, and I'm just showing here just one picture that summarizes us all. We're still on the left side of the picture, where the war is still raging on, with a lot of emissions going into the atmosphere. But we hope that Lady Justice will speak and will make sure that money will be transferred from Russia to Ukraine, and that it can be used for a green and sustainable recovery of this country. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Great. Yeah, and here you can see the link where you can download our report, including my contact details. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Leonard. I don't know whether you can observe the audience, but they were listening carefully, picturing every single slide that you did, and you should make this link in the very beginning. You will save a lot of megabytes in people's phones. And like as a Ukrainian, like I understand that this report costs worth $10 billion. Well, great, thank you for this. But as a scientist, I would say that this report is like minimum, I don't know, 100 PhD dissertation in law, in economics, in many other spheres, because it's opened up a very innovative topic in the emissions of war. And for us, as for the Ukraine, of course, like the aggression of war of Russia, like pains hugely. But we understand that we need to give for the future generation the mechanism of stopping the further war. This is our dedication to the whole of the world. That not if, but when we will make aggressor accountable, it will send a strong signal that the same way as polluters pay, aggressors also pay, or refill, or anything like this. This is like a very important message that we would like to give with this event. And by saying this, I would like to give a floor to Anna Ackerman, who today represents the Eco Action, a very distinguished NGO in Ukraine, but she has different other hats. But I would say, knowing Anna for many years, she's a fighter, on a climate change front. But the topic of your report is not, a military one. You're speaking about the green recovery. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for coming and for your interest. This is really precious. Leonard indeed has started this incredible work, and we are very proud to support it. This is already the third report. And that this report features, among other things, we just started asking questions, the ways for accountability. And again, we are opening this up, and hopefully others will join us, because we really need to understand how to make it work. It will be, again, as Oleksiy mentioned, will be necessary not only for Ukraine, but for many other countries. Ukraine is also actively raising the topic of ecocide after the Kakhovka dam blow-up, which is also important for many other countries. And one of the things that we also want to do is to rebuild the country green and sustainable after the war. We first, to be honest, in the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Russia last year, we were calling it green post-war reconstruction. But the reality is that reconstruction has started very, very quickly, and we are rebuilding already now. So we want to be building already today much better than, with older type of technologies and so on. So I was asked today to give you a ray of light and to talk about also this topic, which is also very, very important for Ukraine. And before I dig into more details, I would like to say that Ukraine, notwithstanding this terrible Russia's war of aggression, and all of the missiles which are flying on our heads every single day, financed by fossil fuels, which Russia just keeps getting all of these billions every day by selling their oil and gas to the world. Notwithstanding all of this, Ukraine said that we are still aiming to phase out coal by 2035. This is the target that Ukraine set back in 2021 in Glasgow by joining Power in Pascal Alliance. So we confirmed that just recently. And tomorrow in Ukrainian Pavilion, we'll be discussing the pathways to decarbonize our energy sector by 2050 and so on. So this is incredible that we are moving ahead with this on the national level and trying to find ways to make it work. On one hand, so there is this, and at the same time, our cities are doing also incredible things. I was amazed how in 2022, one of our northern cities, a big regional center, while being under shelling and everything. I remember I was reading the news, and the news was that they adopted their municipal energy plan with a goal to decarbonize their city and to adopt energy efficiency measures and to make their energy production cleaner. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, let's forget it. It's not relevant. But no, it is as relevant as never. And why is it relevant? When one of the things is that we cannot imagine how to do otherwise, because Ukraine, we have hundreds of cities who are working on their climate and energy plans already for many years. So they started this job, they wanted to continue, they want to keep on going. But another thing that I think will be useful for the whole world is that we saw with Russia's attacks against our critical energy infrastructure facilities, which are largely centralized energy facilities, thermal power plants, nuclear power plants, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia NPP, being occupied currently by Russia. It's incredible. So all of this infrastructure is very vulnerable during such a horrible conflict. You will be launching many missiles. One of them may hit the thermal power plant, and then all of the cost of it is gone. So and many people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, have no electricity. What is the way out? Well, the way out is decentralized, renewable energy production, decentralized energy systems in general. So this is already embedded in the recently updated energy strategy of Ukraine, where we say that we want to decarbonize the energy sector, but we also want to decentralize because it's about resilience. Resilience matters as anything else. So basically, this is the answer why our cities saw how it is important to have local energy production where they are. When Russia started their mass attacks against the energy infrastructure in November 22, and throughout the last winter, and we expect it to repeat maybe even on a bigger scale this winter, we started importing lots of diesel generators. Hundreds of thousands of diesel generators that were running 24/7. You probably would not be surprised that it appeared to be very, very expensive to be running them. And the electricity from this produced by these diesel generators cost at times 8 or 10 times more than electricity from the grid. So of course then many cities started asking NGOs, so civil society, can we have a more systematic approach? We know that renewables are out there and so on. So we started having first projects. There was a very, very pilot ones. So together with municipalities, NGOs started, finding money, also fundraising all over the world to get the renewables for critical infrastructure facilities, which are hospitals, schools, kindergartens, and water supplies facilities. One of the first projects we launched it in January this year, was a small hospital in the north of Ukraine, which has solar PV panels and a storage system and a heat pump. This hospital was shelled by Russian forces, so the municipality kind of upgraded it, and then we could install all this new infrastructure. And now they produce enough energy to cover all of the basic needs to treat their patients every single day. And then more and more cities started asking NGOs who were working on these topics, hey, can we also get this sort of things, Some municipalities, although they have shortage of resources, said that they are also ready to invest, to have long-term investments, to do anything but to have that because it is important. But unfortunately, the resources are very scarce, and this is one of the issues we are facing. I would like to also again state, municipalities and NGOs started working on all of this, and generally speaking, the Ukrainian communities and civil society are the sources of Ukraine's resilience since the very beginning. And for many of them, green reconstruction is not just the beautiful words again, just like how I've just showcased. It's not, so for many of them, green reconstruction in the time of full-scale war is about energy and resource security, about saving scarce financial resources, new jobs, environmental safety, inclusivity, and European integration, many other things. But to rebuild better, we need the knowledge, capacity, and available resources. And according to a report that Leonard has prepared, And she shows how important it is to be building circular economy also and this is for us something very new. In Ukraine, we have been discussing a lot, the good old energy efficiency, renewables, but then now all of a sudden we have all of this debris from the destroyed buildings. Building sector is the most damaged one in Ukraine. How do you deal with that? How do you build up the infrastructure quickly? It's very complicated to do it quickly. So now, actually, when I looked at Leonard's report, we were discussing, I thought, oh my God, which energy efficiency? We have to be thinking now larger scale and be attracting all of the resources needed, to actually reduce the carbon emissions and be thinking even more systemically than what we thought was important before. Yeah, I think I would stop in there, just maybe to mention one more thing that is important. So according to the World Bank latest assessment that was published in spring this year, Ukrainian reconstruction, if we rebuild back better, costs more than $400 billion. This is the sums that Ukraine would never be able to afford, ever, at least in the coming decades. So we need the support, but we want to, we not just want to build the houses, import stuff from somewhere and say now we have something like in the Netherlands. We want to be producing these materials at home. We need to be developing this economy at home to make sure that it's truly sustainable, that people are engaged, that the internally displaced persons, find the activities for them and so on. So the challenges are enormous. Resources needed are enormous. There is a will to do it. And this is why we are starting small. We need these first pilots to showcase what it means, to have a passive house in Ukraine, how it looks like, not somewhere else in the world, but in Ukraine, and to be going ahead with that. There is so many people, incredible people, very active, who want to have that, who want to see this green reconstruction working, again, already today, not waiting, but have it today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna. Okay, 10 billion euros from Leonard, or dollars, 400 billion euros or dollars from Anna. But one may say, are we competing with the developing nation for this money? And the answer, I would say no, because we have around 300 billion dollars or euros or whatever of frozen Russian assets. And Russians are destroying our country. Russians will pay the price. And just to add something for Anna as an off-topic, we, together with the Kyiv School of Economics and UNDP, did the research on different terminology on green recovery. Basically, the recovery concept was first adopted for the recovery from natural disaster. Then recovery was after COVID, and now the recovery is after the war. So what we've read, we know, build back better, building forward better, build back sustainably, build back green, nature positive recovery, climate neutral recovery, sustainable recovery, green recovery, sustainable reconstruction, sustainable and inclusive reconstruction, carbon neutral reconstruction, climate positive plan for economic recovery, and etc. So the question is still rising. Is it about the same? Is it about some emphasis on more biodiversity stuff, or more for phasing out fossil fuel? But I guess this is another lesson learned from Ukraine, that we need to use terminology. We need to use a proper concept for the, unfortunately, further war recovery, because we envisage that it just getting not only hotter in our planet, but among different countries, unfortunately. And by saying this, I would like to pass the floor to our next speaker, who will be building the bridges and saying about the gaps, so the state of the military mission reporting gaps, by Lindsay Cottrell, Environment Policy Officer and Conflict and Environmental Observatory. Did I pronounce everything correctly?
Yes, that's fine.
Oh, I'm great, thank you. The floor is yours, and I will give you the clicker.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So hello everybody, and thank you everyone for joining this side event, and many thanks for the invitation from Ukraine to join this very important side event today. So I'm going to go a bit more global, and I'm going to cover military greenhouse gas emissions and briefly explain the current state of reporting to the UNFCCC, why it is important that it's got to get better, and further action that's still needed. Oh, sorry. So just first of all, a very brief introduction to my organisation, the Conflict and Environment Observatory, CEOBS. We're a UK charity working to increase the protection of people and ecosystems from the impacts of armed conflict and military activities. So in 2021, for COP26, we set up the Military Emissions Gap website with colleagues from the University of Durham and the University of Lancaster in the UK. And this was to highlight the lack of data and the need for better understanding and transparency around the military's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And a focus on the military is important. Obviously, we've heard all of that already. But because, as stated by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg back in COP26 for 2020 and 2021, there is no way to reach net zero without also including emissions from the military. And also, actually, last Friday at COP28, the Secretary General also said that NATO has prioritised addressing climate change, and that by 2050 we should be as a net zero in the armed forces. So we look forward to seeing that. So why focus on the military? Well, we know they are huge consumers of fossil fuels. Obviously, we've seen that from Leonard's data with respect to a conflict setting, but that's also the case in a, I'll say peacetime setting, but it's not always strictly the case, peacetime. Secondly, we know relatively little about the overall impact of global greenhouse gas emissions from the military. And thirdly, we know that this needs to change given the risk of increased emissions with increased expenditure and the number of wars that are rising and the military activity that's increasing. In addition to Gaza and Ukraine, there's 54 ongoing conflicts around the globe. And we know that data is king. You need data to provide evidence, to influence policy, to initiate change. It's also needed to track progress, identify where more focus may be needed, promote awareness and demonstrate success. Data on the military's greenhouse gas emissions to the UNFCCC is not very visible, and sometimes it's really difficult to understand what it means and is it telling us the full picture. So data is requested by the UN on military fuel use, but it's not straightforward to find and it's only voluntary. So they don't really have to report it if they don't want to. The data sits under energy, under category 1A5, under other, not specified elsewhere. And stationary fuel use covers heating, boilers, generators, fixed assets and bases. And then there's mobile fuel use, so that's obviously anything to do with vehicles, ships and aircraft. But under the other, this means that data can also be sometimes include other civilian sources, and military fuel use data can also sometimes be reported elsewhere, which might be aggregated with other, say, transport data. So you don't actually know what the military's contribution is towards that. So looking at the data that is supplied to the UNFCCC, it's not possible to get a clear picture of the total military fuel use. Of the data provided to the UNFCCC this year, which is emissions data from 2021, because it's always 2 years back, of course, of all Annex 1 countries, so these are the ones that are dark, in the dark shade, only 4, yes, that's 4, provided disaggregated data in line with the UNFCCC obligations. No useful data was provided by non-Annex 1 countries, so that's the light shaded ones, which will include some of the world's largest military expenditures. That's China, India, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Israel, Brazil, Qatar, Singapore, Pakistan, Colombia. They're all in the top 25 in terms of military expenditure, and this is based on the available information we've got on spending. So there's some countries we don't know what their spending is. And they have a combined military spend of around about 585 billion in 2022. For the Annex 1 countries, very few report both sets of disaggregated data to the UN. They're the ones highlighted in green, and several, they're the ones highlighted in red, which provide no mobile fuel use data or no data at all. And there's lots of inconsistencies because, as I said before, it's only a voluntary obligation. And when we look at the G20 countries, so the G20 countries straggle across both the UNFCCC Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 definitions. The 2023 UNEP emissions gap report notes that 80% of climate change is attributed to these G20 countries. And for 2025, these have a military expenditure of around about 1.83 trillion, which around 48% is US expenditure. But then when we look at those G20 countries submitting disaggregated data, only some are providing disaggregated data to the UN. They're the ones shown in light grey. And just one G20 country, that's Germany, is submitting both mobile and stationary disaggregated data to the UN. So those G20 countries in dark grey are not submitting anything that's meaningful. And these make up around about 40% of the G20 military expenditure. And because the UNFCCC data is so very poor, it's really difficult to kind of make an estimate of what the overall contribution of the military is to greenhouse gas emissions. But colleagues at the Scientists for Global Responsibility have developed a method and have made an estimate that it's around about 5.5% of total global gas emissions come from the military. And that's about the same, actually, as the healthcare sector, which is another big portion, obviously. So this... Putting this into context, as you'll see here, if it was a country, it would have the 4th highest carbon footprint in the world, which is higher than Russia. And this, as I said, is a very, very broad estimate because we've got so many gaps in the data sets. But it's a start. There is a disparity about this data gaps because several countries actually already do some public reporting in country on energy use and greenhouse gas emission. And this includes Australia, actually, who for the first time in their annual report now includes scope 1, 2 and 3, some scope 3 data. Norway also publish annual greenhouse gas emission data, which includes actually quite a broad range of the scope 3, so this is your supply chain. Some countries cite reasons of national security or confidentiality to not provide this data to the UN, which just shows that there's real inconsistencies because it doesn't reflect what other wider attitudes are across other countries. So overall, we're generally seeing that there's some data on fuel use, the scope 1 stuff, more limited on purchase energy, so the scope 2, say electricity use, and then very limited on the scope 3 emissions. So that's, as I said, the indirect emissions from the supply chain. And you see here we have this other category, scope 3 plus, which is what Leonard's been talking about in his estimates, which is a category to try and capture those emissions which are related to warfighting activities as well. And of course, no countries are reporting their warfighting activity emissions. So the 5.5% covers day-to-day military activities only. It does not capture emissions from the warfighting activities themselves. So militaries obviously have a large and complex supply chain, and we know that emissions from supply chains, the scope 3, typically far exceed an organisation's own emissions. And going back to that Norway data I talked about, so their annual emissions report for 2022, so this is the in-country reporting that they're doing, not the reporting that's asked of the UNFCCC, they calculated that around about 80% of their emissions were actually coming from the supply chain. And this shows, so this slide here is just to give you an outline of what we would expect to see, all those different categories of what proper reporting should look like from the militaries, including those scope 3 plus categories there as well. So NATO are actually, they do recognise the need for better reporting, and they have developed a methodology for NATO's civilian and military activities and installations, which was published this year in July. And this is a welcome step forward, but most critically, it excludes emissions from NATO's led operations and emissions and other activities such as training and exercises. And we need to understand how this is going to be addressed in the future, as well as these other scope 3 plus emissions. So NATO's air defender exercise, for example, in June 2023 involved 25 nations over 2 weeks, around 10,000 personnel and 250 aircraft. And at the request of some German MPs, a pre-exercise estimate of greenhouse gas emissions was made, and this came out around about 35,000 tonnes. But there's some really big gaps in this data set, and this was being provided by others. We don't actually know where the data sources came from. It only included the aircraft. It didn't look at any of the data from any of the other vehicles, and it didn't think about things like non-CO2 effects, like from the contrails from the aircraft themselves. So NATO have also published a compendium of best practice, with 17 of the current 31 NATO members contributing to this year's first one, and it highlights the current activities across climate awareness, mitigation, adaptation and outreach. Few actually provide any detail on what greenhouse gas emission data is collected and reporting, which is unfortunate. This year we were lucky enough to co-organise the first conference on military and conflict emissions, and we discussed a whole range of paths available for mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, and did ask attendees to rank which they thought were kind of the best mitigation options, most and least important with respect to tackling greenhouse gas reductions across the military. And no surprise, the one that came out top was comprehensive emissions data reporting, reduction targets, and external accountability for military and conflict-related greenhouse gas emissions. Followed by, in second, rethinking of military strategy, foreign policy, with greater investment in peace building, arms control, and diplomacy. We know obviously that nationally determined contributions are key to achieving the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement, and that successive NDCs should be progressive and reflect the highest possible ambition. Looking at the NDCs submitted to date for the top 20 countries in terms of military expenditure, we don't see any inclusion or reduction of emissions from the military. In some cases, actually, it's actually excluded, for example, in Australia there. But I want to give you some hope as well, a little light. It's encouraging for the first time, the military emissions does appear in the UNEP emissions gap report. It's only a sentence, but it's noted that military emissions are insufficiently accounted for under the UNFCCC reporting convention. It's also encouraging that the European Parliament's COP20 resolution also stresses the need for the acceleration of decarbonation technologies and strategies in defence, calls for the formulation of a proposal to look at transparency around accounting of military emissions to the UN, and also asks for UN member states to ensure that military greenhouse gas emissions are included in domestic net zero targets. So it's encouraging indeed. And we obviously must work to see this change. And last year as well, we also had, I just wanted to mention from last December, the UN General Assembly adopted the resolution on the protection of the environment in relation to armed conflict, so PERAC. The resolution has 27 principles developed by the UN International Law Commission, and the principles recognise how armed conflicts may be severe and have the potential to exacerbate global environmental challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss. So earlier this year, Switzerland and the International Committee of the Red Cross did host a meeting of government experts from about 120 countries. And the collection of data on greenhouse gas emissions was actually given as one example of information that can be gathered, as well as the need for monitoring energy and fuel use and the efforts to reduce military carbon emissions. So we need to maintain the call to ensure that this actually happens. So to conclude, then, transparency, improvements in reporting and data is critical, and we need emissions properly addressed in the UNFCCC framework and within NDCs. We know that improvements in reporting are possible, and steps are already being taken and started, and is reflected in some country reporting. This is important to ensure that governments and people know where carbon budget sits and that their militaries are accountable. We need reduction committees to reduce we need reduction commitments from the military, and we need a special IPCC report to fully evaluate military and conflict emissions properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a super interesting report. I was trying to grasp any big figures to put on someone's bill, but I would say you just repeat something that I said in the very beginning in an opening speech. Like, we are here opening some kind of very inconvenient truth about the uncovered emission, which needs to be dealt somehow. It's hard, but we believe we should do this because this is how it should be. And I would like to open the floor for Q&A session. We have half an hour, but I would propose to take a couple of questions just to give our speakers a bit of rest for tomorrow's hard negotiations. I would start while to warm up, and everybody is like a bit hesitating. We have a microphone here, but I would like to give a floor to Victoria and from the ministry. And you heard 3 big reports from 3 different expert and NGO organizations. Are you using this for at your ministry, and how?
Я в першу чергу хочу подякувати за таку роботу, яку провели науковці на чолі з Ленардом де Клерком.
First of all, I would like to thank the scientists who conducted such a great job headed by Leonard de Klerk.
На початку повномасштабного вторгнення ми навіть не могли подумати, що ми будемо фіксувати шкоду і викиди від парникових газів саме від війни.
At the beginning of full-scale invasion, we even could not imagine that we will be documenting and monitoring emissions because of the war.
І коли ми на минулому КОПі-27 вперше ознайомилися саме з звітом, який нам надали викиди від війни парникових газів за 9 місяців, ми його читали, ми думали, ми аналізували, а як ми це можемо використати, а що воно нам дає, і як ми можемо відшкодувати саме шкоду, завдану Україні.
At the last COP, COP27, when we saw the report, we were reading it, we were thinking how we may use it so we can refund the caused damage.
Коли ми отримали звіт за рік, ми вже чітко розуміли, що наша задача про це говорити. Наша задача створити саме юридичні механізми для того, щоб це був початком саме нарахування шкоди саме від викидів парникових газів, тому що ми всі знаємо, що шкода з викидів в атмосферне повітря, забруднення води, ґрунтів, це все обраховується, на це все є методики, на це все є затверджені міжнародні документи.
When we received last year, we understood that when we received the report last year, we received that we need to talk and we need to create judicial mechanisms so we may refund it and with using international mechanisms and legal acts as well.
Тому ми якраз на КОПі-28 хочемо започаткувати роботу саме на основі цих звітів, і я запрошую вас 9 грудня саме до нашого павільйону на 15:00, там де буде оголошено, як ми це бачимо, як ми це плануємо і як ми це хочемо переводити саме в юридичну площину і надалі. І не тільки, щоб цей звіт використовувала Україна, а щоб завдяки цьому звіту кожний агресор зрозумів, що йому прийдеться заплатити.
So at this COP, COP28, we want to launch the work and we want to start our working on based on the reports. And I invite all of you at the 9th of December at 15 o'clock to the Ukrainian pavilion, to the event where we shall be announcing our vision and our vision of mechanism and implementation as well. So that mechanism may be used not only in Ukraine but in the world.
Я думаю, відповіла.
Okay, I got. So you did the teaser for the presentation. So we need to get together when on 9th, yes, or on 9th. So we will get together on 9th, and we'll share you how the practical side of the implementation of this interesting job. Any other question, comments? Oh, we have 2 hands. So it was first I saw, and then the second, please.
So thank you all for your time and coming to speak with us today. Can you elaborate a little bit more on using ecocide as an avenue for holding Russia accountable through the ICJ and similar courts, and how these courts should choose a sufficient remedy to balance consider the future implications of the present aggression?
And could you please name yourself for the audience and online?
My name is Jack Kalinsky. I'm a student at Cornell University.
Thank you. So, who will take this question?
Уряд України на протязі вже 1,5 року робить все можливе, щоб екоцид мав саме юридичне визначення, тому що на сьогодні це тільки слово, і ніхто не розуміє, що він за собою, що це мається на увазі. Ми розуміємо, що це знищення природи, це знищення навколишнього середовища, але юридичного визначення немає, і тому ми зі своєї сторони робимо все можливе, щоб на міжнародному рівні це було прийнято і це було визначено. Тому робота проводиться урядом, і завдяки підтримки міжнародних партнерів, завдяки підтримки наших громадських організацій, завдяки підтримки, напевно, всіх, хто хоче зупинити війну, всіх, хто хоче саме зупинити шкоду довкіллю.
The government of Ukraine has been working for 1.5 years, so the ecocide may be judicially defined. So it is not only the word, because it is literally a destruction and destroying of the nature. And we are doing our best so it may be defined with the support of NGOs and many partners, international partners. За підтримки і все.
Що вони нам допомагають це все проводити.
Це все.
Just to add on that, so indeed there is some work done because ecocide on the international level is not defined yet. You may know that there is a definition proposed by the international lawyers and from Stop Ecocide International. They work on that, and they, I think Stop Ecocide International also clearly see that the Kakhovka Dam case can be seen as the act of ecocide according to this definition. It's also important to underline that Ukraine is one of the few countries that does recognize ecocide as a crime under its domestic law. So it is defined under Article 441 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine as a mass destruction of flora and fauna, pollution of atmosphere or water resources, as well as committing other actions that can cause an environmental catastrophe. So we have that, and of course we have to be working at the national level. Of course, if ecocide on the international level in the nearest time may be defined and we can be moving ahead, we cannot, unfortunately, take actions, retroactive actions from the past, which Ukraine is having now. So we have lots of cases of very grave damages to the environment committed. But then again, we want to make sure that the world sees, the world knows, and that we act for the future, that other countries would have these tools to act. We are trying to, I think Leonard already showed the whole list, perhaps you can also comment on that, of all the different mechanisms that we are reviewing to make sure that all of the different types, including the climate impacts of the war, would be included in the registry to hold Russia accountable. But yeah, just a small comment that we are trying to move ahead with that.
I don't know whether it was an answer to your question, but like you will have a chance to speak like after the end of the session. We have a second question, please.
So, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
My name is Vlad. I'm a law student of the Kyiv Mohil Academy and here as a young advisor of UNICEF Ukraine. So I would like to address the issue about agricultural land. You have mentioned that deforestation, shellings, murder of animals are like the biggest issues and also the circumstances, preconditions for the compensations, like for this illegal actions done by Russian Federation. But you haven't really thought about soils, about agriculture land, because the Ministry of Ecology said that like approximately, I would like to name this, that's more than 5 million hectares of agricultural land in Ukraine have been contaminated by the war, especially considering that there are like several types of contamination, chemical, biological, mechanical, and so on. So from this perspective, how Ukraine and especially the relevant ministry can change the situation with soils, like perhaps somehow using modern technologies, somehow like filtering that, because like it affects the food, agriculture, especially that Ukraine as the developing country is mostly specialized in the field of farming and so on. And how can we attribute this international wrongful act as the part of the ecocide to Russia Federation? Thank you so much.
Дякую за запитання. Насправді забруднення ґрунтів, забруднення землі – це одне з пріоритетних питань, але в нас зараз ще є інший виклик – замінування. Тому що майже 30% території України заміновано. Ми найбільше замінована країна Європи і, можливо, і світу вже. Тому нам спочатку потрібно вирішити питання, а як ми будемо його розміновувати?
Thank you for your question. And indeed, our priority is soil contamination, but we have another issue, that is mining. For now, 30% of our territory is mined, and we are most mined country in Europe, if not in the whole world. So first of all, we need to demine our territory.
Також зараз Міністерство економіки, Міністерство захисту довкілля та інші урядові організації працюють з міжнародними партнерами щодо розмінування, але для нас, для Міністерства захисту довкілля важливо, щоб це розмінування було екологічно безпечним.
Now, Ministry of Economy, Ministry for Environmental Protection and other governmental institutions are working with international partners in demining. But for us, as for Ministry of Environmental Protection, it is important that demining is green.
Також ми працюємо над тим, як ми будемо відновлювати наші ґрунти. Працюємо не тільки наше міністерство, весь уряд, тому що після трагедії, яка сталася на Каховській ГЕС, в нас змінилась екосистема Херсонської області, ми втратили велику частину родючих земель, ми втратили певну продовольчу безпеку нашої країни, тому робота йде. Звичайно, пріоритети міняються, пріоритети зараз більш військові, але ми готові, ми відкриті до спілкування, ми відкриті до спілкування з міжнародними організаціями, в кого є технології, в кого є ідеї, як саме після війни відновити родючість наших ґрунтів, як після війни саме відновити цю територію. Вже зараз дуже багато організацій працюють, і про ООН, і UNDP саме в цьому напрямку.
We are currently developing how we will recover our soils. Because after the Kakhovka Dam destruction, the ecosystems, especially in Kherson region, were changed significantly, so it impacted our food security. And now we are ready to cooperate with international organizations and with international partners to restore our soils.
I guess the final round of questions. We have one question here, one question here, and a bonus question for the gender equality.
I don't have so much as a question, as a comment. I will introduce myself shortly. I'm Inna Sovsuna. I'm a member of parliament from Ukraine. It was very interesting for me to see the presentation, and I think it is important to have it here at COP28. And I'm particularly happy to see this presentation here for one single reason, because 10 minutes walk from here, there is a Russian pavilion over there. And I actually forced myself to go there. It was very difficult on an emotional level, but I actually forced myself to go there. I just wanted to see what they are talking about. And I think it is critically important to recognize that it is not okay. They are actually now destroying the atmosphere. They are contributing to the climate change, yet they're here at COP28, and they're talking about how they are supporting the Green Deal. Today they actually had presentations about how Russian nuclear energy is spreading around the world, and they did have participants from different countries who are going there, who are willing to take up a new contract, sign up new contracts with Russian nuclear energy company Rosatom, which, by the way, still doesn't have any sanctions against it on the proper level. So I just wanted to point out to this, to the importance of this event, and I'm actually very happy to see so many people who came here. Not so many people come to the Russian events, but the people with money still do go there. The people who are ready to invest still go there, and I do think that this is important to remember that they're greenwashing what they're doing basically, and they are actually contributing to the climate change with the war against Ukraine, as well as with many their pure economic model that they continue to pursue. But I think it is important for us as people working on different levels in different countries, just to point out to the hypocrisy of this and to remember that they are contributing to the climate change, and those are the numbers which were not made up by Ukrainians. Those are international recognized scientists who are working on that, who have proof of that. And I think it's critically important to recognize this, and again, because only once we recognize it, we will keep them accountable. Only if the world knows that this is the reality, this is what they're doing, and we have to remember about this, because this remains the daily reality for us today. Today I'm here in Dubai at COP. My 11-year-old son is back home in Kiev. He again had to go to the bomb shelter because of yet another air raid alert today in Kiev. So I'm just happy that the world remembers, and I'm happy to see so many people here, and I hope that you will not forget about this despite all the turbulence globally and on other spheres as well. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to thank for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Inna. It was a comment, not a question, but just not to give it unanswered. I just watched precisely who was clapping you, and those who are not clapping, they are Russian or Russian agent, because we do believe that they also came to observe what we are saying, what we are going to do with them, or they are watching us online and having a heart attack with the numbers that we have. Anna, very short, please.
Very short. Rosatom and Russia's nuclear industry. Please do come to Ukraine Pavilion. We have an event on the 9th, I think I'm not mistaken, on the 9th of December, talking about Russia's nuclear energy being involved in war crimes in Ukraine. I just said that they are occupying Europe's largest nuclear power plant, but it does not stop there, unfortunately. So please come. The world has to know. Unfortunately, nobody is talking about that. They are committing many war crimes out there.
Thank you. We are taking 2 questions in a row, and you will answer them, and I guess we will be over one question here, and the microphone please pass to the lady here. She was first one, sorry, and you was at the dessert. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Katrin Gehr with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Thank you so much for this really interesting event. You mentioned that in Ukraine's reconstruction, you will prioritize decentralized renewable energy access. It's been announced that BlackRock, the world's biggest asset manager, in collaboration with McKinsey, will coordinate the investment in rebuilding Ukraine's economy. And BlackRock has openly declared that it has no intention to stop investing in coal, oil, and gas for decades to come. And we also just learned that McKinsey is using its position as a key advisor to push the interests of its big oil and gas clients at this COP. So my question is how you can be certain that investments for reconstruction will indeed prioritize decentralized renewable energy systems, and if there's any safeguards for that. Thank you.
And the second question, this is the first question, and let us have the second, and then we will answer. Please.
I'm Marie Sigas from France Info. You mentioned your desire to share your work in order to help other countries to use the framework that you're designing, so they can use it in the future. What are the difficulties that comes with that when a lot of countries benefits from exportations of arms, and when the military is such an economic force? And do you know if other countries are working on building tools such as the ones you're working on?
Can you one more time specify the question in short, because our speakers are a bit...
Oh, okay. What are the difficulties that comes with sharing with other countries at war the tools you're working on? Because we know that the military and arms are a very big economic source for many countries. And do you know if other countries are working on the same framework?
So who else is helping Ukraine doing the same instruments that we were speaking about? Like who are our counterparts in this activity? Те, що ми сьогодні проговорювали, якраз ці формати. The first question about the decentralized energy and BlackRock activity and other investment facility. If we not forget about Leonard. Leonard, if you wish to answer something, just shake your head. If not, I can take this question. Basically, it's also an energy special. Okay, yeah, Leonard, yeah, please. We didn't forget about you.
Yeah.
First or second question, please.
This related to the second question. How this what, let's say, lessons learned that we're learning here in this Ukraine war, how that can be applied to, to other countries and to other conflicts. So, what we've been doing is a first, and we're learning a lot from, how to estimate conflict emissions. And one of our plans is actually also to prepare next year a sort of generic methodology on conflict emissions that can be applied to other conflicts, because we there are many similarities with other conflicts. For example, with the war in Gaza at the moment, the amount of reconstruction that has to happen there is significant. So. What we are doing now will be very useful for others in the future.
Okay, anyone else? Anna, please.
Yeah, how to ensure green reconstruction is prioritized. I think we have to definitely distinguish between emergency needs, basically to satisfy the basic needs of people. And this is one question. But another question is planning longer term. This is what we are trying to do, because from the examples that I gave to you, cities are already developing their plans on climate energy to 2030 and further on. We have cities that were heavily damaged, like Mykolaiv and Kharkiv, who are rethinking their cities fully, also with some international support, having internationally renowned architects coming in to fully rethink the general plan of the city, because the city had all of the critical infrastructure destroyed. So all of the each single hospital, kindergarten was shelled and so on. So they are trying to make new approaches and involve community and think how to build sustainably. So this is what I'm talking about when I mean green reconstruction. But how to make sure it's prioritized, I think, so none post-war reconstruction in the world has ever been green. So we are trying to make it for the first time. So if you have ideas, if you know how to do it, it's very complicated, of course. And especially because building greener often means it's more expensive straight away. Where do we take this money from, right? So instead of building 5 normal, like basic standard house, we can build one great active house. But you know, what does it mean? So we need ideas. And thank you for the comment about McKinsey and BlackRock. I think it's the question to probably the government and so on. I haven't known about that, but we'll take it into consideration just to know. Thank you.
Yeah, just to we have 1 minute left and we need to be exactly at time, but we started 1 minute later. Yeah, sure.
Can I just second what Leonard was saying about methodologies and the importance of having this a consistent approach and being able to adapt and use that for other conflicts. Because there's no international standard, there's no way that's currently measured within the UNFCCC, and that just sets a precedent showing that it can be done and it should be done.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very short answer. And then from my end, I analyzed the agreement with the BlackRock that was signed on the creation of some kind of vehicle during the London Recovery Conference. And I saw the presentation. I was deliberately looking for some kind of a green, big, better, whatever. There was ESG there, so it's not, it's not, climate change, Paris aligned, SDGs, whatever. But it's at least something. But it will depend from Ukraine. We would like our recovery will be green. We are joining the European Union. It means that all of this kind of taxonomy, NDCs, whatever, will be there. So it's indeed emergency and fast recovery. It will be with the diesel generator. Unfortunately, it's painful to say, but this is for people to survive. But the long-term plans are all green. So I have no doubt with it. Our government is communicating build back better, build back greener, build back sustainably. There is something that is being done, to prepare for it, but the investment will come after the end of the war, after our victory. We have now Ukrainian investors who are investing in the country. We built the first ever wind turbine park in Mykolaiv region with our private money. We have the first bio-methane factory. And, it cost the Russians only 1 rocket to destroy it. And, it's a private investment. Nobody